Hi, everyone. Welcome, queer visitors. I'm Jonathan. If you're new here, welcome to our first book club of 2026. If you've been here before, welcome back. We have been exploring the wonderful land of Oz for the last 5, 6 months now. I am so happy to move on from the Land of Oz and start with a brand new book with a live author who can join us. So we have been reading The Lilac People by Milo Todd, and give a shout out to Counterpoint Press for introducing us to Milo and this wonderful book. And we have two amazing co-host today. So we have Milo Todd, the author of the book. He is a Lambda Literary Fellow from Massachusetts Cultural Council and co-editor-in-chief of the award-winning LGBTQ literary journal Fog Lifter, and also runs the Queer Writer newsletter. The Lilac People is his debut novel, and it's a national bestseller, and it's been widely celebrated, and has also just won a Stonewall Book Award and has had amazing recommendations from the ALA, Goodreads, The Post, Publishers Weekly, the Boston Globe. And we're so excited to have Milo here with us to talk about this book. And our other co-host is a very old friend of mine, and a really amazing artist, Severely Mame, uses he, she, and they pronouns. They are a fiber artist, a folk witch, and history buff living in Western New York. Once a self-described star of the bar, stage, and phone screen, Mame now spends their time restoring their 1910 home, the House Hexen, and deepening their practice in fiber and witchcrafts, all in service to their community. When she's not creating or restoring, Mame loves escaping into classic movies of the 30s and 40s for inspiration. And we're so happy to have both of them with us today. So thank you so much for joining us and your patience, and would love to chat about the Lilac People.
Thanks for having us, Jonathan. I really appreciate it. I love being here.
Hello, everyone. I'm very excited that we all can kind of get to know Milo and more about the Lilac People together. Thank you, Drag Story Hour, for having me in general. Very excited to be invited onto this. And thank you, the regulars of Queer Visitors, for letting me join in as well. Milo, I really enjoyed reading your book, though I did much more crying in this book than I do with most that I read. I'm not one to read fiction in general. I was telling Jonathan that the last time I read a work of fiction was probably in 2020, and it was Christopher Isherwood.
Ooh,
So it was very much in the same
perfect.
vein as the Lilac People, but much different variation on the same timeline and community, which was
Mhm.
interesting, even though there's been 6 years between them. I thought that that was funny that that was my last time reading a fictional book as well.
I love that was the last fiction book that you read. It's
And I
perfect.
just for anyone, I have read since 2020. I just primarily read witchcraft and occult books. I don't really read fiction anymore. So this is a great opportunity to jump out of what I normally do. And I'm so excited to be here and chat with you. I've got questions. There's been ones that Jonathan also helped form because I've never done any sort of book club before. So this is a exciting first for me, especially with the author. I think that what a rare stroke of luck for all of us here today. Milo, I think that where I would like to start with you is what inspired you to jump into this timeline and this group of people that you centered your book around?
Yeah, well, thanks for all that, and thanks again to Drag Story Hour and Queer Visitors and all you lovely folks for inviting me to this, but also picking the book up at all and reading it. It's a really big deal, and I really appreciate that support. And Mame, I appreciate you being here and being a fellow enthusiast of the time, as I can tell from your Chicago poster in behind you and all that stuff. Beautiful. Yeah, so I'm really happy to be here. So thank you for your question. So what kind of inspired this for me? It's actually started back in either 2015 or 2016. It was right around there. I remember because it was back when Facebook was still somewhat useful. And so I was scrolling through, random posts. Sometimes you don't know who you're following, they're just strangers, and that's fine. To this day, do not remember who posted this, and I wish I did. But someone randomly posted like a simple meme, like text on screen, that said something along the lines of, "Did you know that when the Allied forces came in and liberated the camps, they let everyone else go, but basically the queer and trans people, who they then instead put into jail?" And at the time, I was like, that can't be true. These days, I'm like, yeah, that tracks. But at the time, I was like, this can't be true. And so I looked it up, and it was true. And I remember I just got so angry, and angry, obviously, for what had happened, but also really angry that as someone who loves queer and trans history, I didn't know this. And I was like, how do I not know this? And it wasn't even, like one group of people trying to cover this up. It was whole countries covering this up. And
Mhm.
it just, everyone was covering up their sins. And so, me being me, I was like, well, I'm going to find out everything I can and tell everybody about it. And so, that one little meme post I tripped over one day ended up being essentially a 10-year project that ended up being the Lilac People.
Now, you were talking about I will actually get back to the Allied forces a little bit later because that was one of my most interesting parts of the book for me. And you've kind of stepped into this a little bit, but what did your research process look like? How long did this book take from like your initial research to the finished manuscript?
Yeah. So the research was tough. It was tough just content-wise for reasons I'm sure anyone who's read the book understands. Believe it or not, I pulled back a lot. And then I gave it to my agent, and my agent said, "You need to pull back." And I said, "I already did." And he said, "Do it more." So
Yeah.
I had to pull back. And it made sense. It did, because it was just very intense. So that alone was difficult. But then there was a difficulty of just finding this work or this information in general. Obviously, a lot of it was purposely destroyed. Plenty of it got lost to history because of archiving that just didn't know better to look for this. And so by the time people started asking questions, like all these people had passed away, everyone was gone. And a lot of the primary sources were just gone. So I searched and searched, and I found some stuff in English, and that kind of got me started or had been translated into English. And I hit a wall pretty early enough. And I was like, well, there's all this stuff in German. And I thought, well, then I'll just learn German. And so then I learned German. And to be fair, I'm not fluent, like I'm not amazing with it, but I do think that if I somehow miraculously found myself in a part of Germany that somehow did not speak English whatsoever, I would be okay. I would be able to muddle my way through. But that so that added some time. But by that point, I was just so invested in this. I was like, I gotta see this through. So I learned German and then started looking at the German documentation and everything, and that really helped out as well. Big shout out to the Magnus Hirschfeld Society in Berlin. These folks dedicated basically their lives. They were founded in either the 70s or the 80s, and they have dedicated their lives to recovering every surviving scrap of information about the Weimar Republic and queer and trans people and Magnus Hirschfeld and the Institute and all that stuff. So they were like my gold mine for finding information once I knew German. And they were extremely helpful, lovely people.
I can't believe that you learned German for your research process here. As someone who has in the past tried to jump into that, I truly commend you because it is a feat. It's not an easy language to learn.
It's not. Obviously, it was one of those things where if I knew what I was getting into at the start of the project, I probably never would have taken it on, quite frankly. It was a lot. And I was like, I'm never going this hard ever again. Yeah.
You say it, but I'm gonna be honest, I doubt it. You do it once, and then with anything, I think in us, we think, well, that was so hard, I'm never doing that again. And then it just creeps up on you. And then
Yeah,
you
that's
again.
true.
But I love that. The commitment alone to learning German just to get the best amount of information is really
Yeah.
dedicated and really inspiring. In the prior question, you talked about the anger that you felt about the Allied forces, like the
Yeah.
information about the Allied forces re-imprisoning all of the queer and trans people. When you went into the process of like planning and writing this book, did you go in with the intention of writing something educational, something for entertainment, or
Mhm.
something just as a vessel for the feelings that you had about the information that you had picked up?
So I knew starting out that if I found enough information that would be like book, like enough for a book, it was always going to be historical fiction.
Mhm.
I felt strongly about this because I really wanted to put a human face to it and bring the humanity back to it. And there's nothing wrong with nonfiction. I love nonfiction. I'm always reading it. Museums, all that stuff is so important, but especially when it comes to something like the Holocaust, like World War II, it was so just horrific and so astronomically horrible that we ultimately often only talk about it in terms of statistics and numbers. And
Mhm.
again, there's a reason for that because so many people were affected and it was awful. But I really wanted to do historical fiction with this info because I wanted to bring that human face back to it and be like, technically, the bulk of these characters in the book were fictionalized, but they're based heavily on the people of the time. And just bringing that face back to it and saying, yeah, like there were so many people, but each of them had a life and each of them had a name and a face and was loved. So I just really wanted to bring that back into it. And I wanted this information to reach as many people as possible. And again, I love nonfiction, but I do, generally speaking, feel that fiction is more accessible than nonfiction. It can be a little bit of an easier read, quote unquote. And so that's something else I wanted to do as well, was to kind of put this into as many hands as possible and make it as accessible as possible. So that's ultimately what I was gearing for. I was like, this will be historical fiction. That being said, I didn't know what the plot was going to be. I didn't know what the characters were going to look like. And that was because I was so determined for this to remain as historically accurate as possible that I wouldn't even think about outlining the book until I had as much information collected as possible. And then I would build the plot and the characters based out of that information.
Now, we have pre-discussed this a little bit off camera, but one of my favorite parts of the book is your corrections at the end.
Yeah, I love
I
it
feel like
too.
the corrections at the end really make the book that putting a face to a name kind of, or
Yeah.
a face to an idea that you're
Hmm.
talking about there. And in the like notes from the author corrections section, you talk about how some of the characters are based off of known actual people to a degree, like names,
Yeah.
general idea of them are based off of these real people that you found in your research. And
Yeah.
when I got there, it felt to me as the reader like you had given told these people's or an amalgamation of these people's stories.
Hmm.
Now, the notes and corrections at the end, I think, explain quite a bit about context of people and characters that you really benefit from. So if anyone skipped that last little chunk, I highly suggest reading through it. It's not very much to read through. But were the characters that you kind of based off of some real people, did they spring out at you in your research, or did it just kind of as you were writing, figuring out what the story was going to be, you were like, oh, I think that these people could be inspiration?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I love that you said that, you enjoyed the back matter, as it were, because I love it too as like as a nerdy person. And I had mentioned this when we were off camera before, but I ultimately put the back matter in there just to make myself feel better. I was like, no one's going to care about this but me. I just want people to know this happened on a Monday instead of a Tuesday. Like even like the smallest changes, I wanted to call myself out on because again, I want this book to be as historically accurate as possible. When you write fiction, unfortunately, life doesn't follow. So there were changes that were unavoidable in order for me to have a book at all. And so I said, well, to make myself feel better, I will say, hey, here's where I changed things. Turned out people loved the back matter. I was actually surprised by this. So many people, they were like, it actually enhances the book. Just realizing how much was true based off of what you said wasn't true in the back of the book. And like, and people were educated and they loved learning these facts and data. And I thought that was wonderful. So I'm glad that you liked it too. The specific people you mentioned, yeah, there's three of them that ultimately they didn't even necessarily pop out at me in any particular way outside of these three people, Carl and Gerd, I made a little change there. These were three real live people. And based on my research, were three of the only known surviving, what we today probably call transmasculine people of the time. And so, as an honor to them, I wanted to name three of the characters, their first names just after them. Ultimately, their lives are not all that similar, but it was just kind of like an honor to them to kind of name them the characters after them. And ultimately, yeah, that was kind of those three that popped out were the ones that not just survived, but like had a record of survival. We know what happened to them afterwards. And bless them, like they all lived to be like 85 years old, 95 years old, and like you love to see it, trans people living really long lives. And so that was just really special to me. Ultimately, I'll just keep blathering on otherwise, but that's that's the best I can answer the question is yeah, it was just that they were some of the only known people that still had a face and a name that remained in history. And I thought that was just really important to give a little highlight to.
Yeah, of course, our queer ancestors are related to us by
Yeah,
action, even if not by blood. There are people, they came before us, like our grandparents and great grandparents. We just
exactly.
might not have that physical connection that some people really prioritize.
Exactly.
There's a lot about chosen family in this book. I'm kind of jumping down into the order of questions I had, so give me 1 second.
No, that's
That was
fine.
kind of segue because like as a queer trans person, I myself have a very distinct respect for my chosen family as being my primary. I have
Yeah.
a fine relationship with my blood family, but the relationship built is so different that queer people can really understand so much more about each other's lives.
Hmm.
I'm trying to find the question
Oh no, take your time.
that specifically did tie into this, but I'm struggling now. But I wanted, while we're talking about characters in the book, we follow Bert, Sophie, and then Carl throughout the majority of the story, with a few others throughout that we learn about and to various degrees.
Hmm.
One part of the book that I kind of started to regard as a character is Das Leila Leid. It's such a common thread throughout the whole book, and it gives us this peer into a very joyful queer moment prior to the war, and then it gets kind of brought back up repeatedly in really dark moments when you consider the song and character at this point. And when you started writing, did you know that it was going to be a thread that can be like followed throughout the entire work?
Yeah, so it's funny. When I first came across Das Lied Lied, which was, to anyone who hasn't finished the book, is the Lilac song or the Lavender song, depending on who you ask. And it's the first known documented queer anthem in the entire colonized world. And so when I tripped over that, I was like, well, that's fascinating. And originally that was just going to be put into the book as flavor, right? Like just this cool stuff, all these firsts for queer and trans people of the time in the colonized world. As I was drafting the book, outlining the book, all the editing, it just seeped in more and more and more. And I realized that it was just organically happening. And I was like, well, let's just go full in with this. And like you said, it's almost its own character, this song. And thematically, I was like, this actually works incredibly well. Like, let's just put it in there more. And so, yeah, originally it was not intentional. I definitely wanted it to be known in the book, but it took on a life of its own as I was working on the book, which I think is kind of the beauty of fiction. You can plan as much as you can, and you'll never quite know what the characters have in mind, and you just let them.
What? Yeah, I love hearing that because I was very aware of this song prior to reading the book. So it was fun to have it pop up and then be a continuous thread
Yeah.
throughout. And it started, the first time we hear it mentioned is at the El Dorado Club in 1932. And in the notes in the back of the book, you talk about how the El Dorado Club is inspired by, there was five El Dorado clubs at some point
Yeah.
in Weimar Germany, and you kind of mixed different ideas of spaces and things like that together in the realm of like the settings of this book. Have you been able to visit any of the places you wrote about and put these characters into?
I see, I love that. So, fun fact, it's a little embarrassing to say, but I have a reason. I have never actually been to Germany. And that is because kind of working class queer over here, working multiple jobs and trying to write a book and learn German. I was like, well, I want to go to Germany, right? I want to visit these spots. And you got to save up for that, right? So I'm saving up and I'm saving up. And I was like, okay, projected, I should have enough money to go to Germany in March, April of 2020.
Yeah.
And that screwed up everything. And so that I never was able to get to Germany because I also wasn't going to put the book on hold. So I gathered as many photos as I could. I analyzed the hell out of things. And I think ultimately, one day I still plan to go to Germany and visit all these spots, some of which the structures no longer exist, but I know where they all are. And I would still visit the open fields and everything where things used to be.
Yeah.
But I think ultimately it did show the beauty of the queer community because I couldn't physically get to Germany, but I could digitally get to Germany. And I started hitting up queer German folks and the Magnus Hirschfeld Society and all this stuff and was like, hey, I'm an American, but could you help me out? And it was, we're strangers, but we all cared about this history and helping each other out. And they helped me out. I helped them out. And that's where I got a lot of my info from. And it was wonderful. And I think it also really speaks to the fact that especially like the recovering of queer and trans history, especially stuff that's been deliberately erased. It takes a community to uncover all of that. There's no one person that is able to do it all. So we all have to work together with all the different bits that we've put together to create something. And I always say with this book, I never want to be walking around being like, oh, I figured all this out all on my own. I'm standing on the shoulders of queer people before me, queer people next to me, all of us doing this labor and helping each other out. So it was, in a weird way, it ended up being a very sweet thing. But no, never have actually been to Germany, and one day I will.
And it's something truly to look forward to. Now that the book is
Yeah.
it exists in your physical hands and you can travel with it to Germany, I think that sounds very exciting. And we start the book in 1945. Was that region chosen for any specific reason? This is just a question that popped up now because I didn't know if there was any sort of ties to any queer stories or anything that you found in your research, or was it a choice that made sense because of its proximity to a concentration camp for the furthering of the story?
Yeah, it was definitely chosen because I basically was like, okay, well, they need to be on a farm basically as far away as you can get from Berlin with still being in Germany, but also needs to be in a US occupied area of Germany once the Allied force, because then Germany got split up between the Allied
Yeah.
forces. So it had to be a US area and close enough to a concentration camp that would make sense for the plot, close enough where they have some way of kind of sneaking out all this stuff. So I just did a bunch of searching for various towns. Oh, another thing I was looking into was an area that didn't get bombed too bad. So there's a
Mhm.
lot of factors in there. I was like, okay, well, what towns fit this description? And looked up pictures of the time and farmhouses. And I just kind of fell in love with the aesthetic too. So I was like, yeah, this is it. This is my spot. So that's ultimately got chosen because it fit the book best.
I think we all know, and if you are knowledgeable of this time and even current Berlin, you know that as like a queer space. And working backwards to find the perfect place for them to kind of be jumping back and forth from,
Hmm.
you very successful. I'm very impressed by how much you've really poured so much thought into every piece of this book, and it really does show.
Thank you. It was exhausting, so I'm glad it's appreciated.
You've got one drag queen really rooting you on. So I don't know how far that goes for you personally or in the world, but you've got
I,
me.
I
So
always want the favor of drag queens.
that
Absolutely.
is a smart place to be standing, I will say. And I finally did find in the notes what I was trying to talk about before. chosen family aspect. Relationships in this book are formed through necessity and care quite a bit. And to quote the book, they were mine because they chose me. In your opinion, how do these relationships differ from biological families in the story?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, the classic being that some of these families were dead and gone, some of these families disowned, or biological families disowned folks like Carl. And it really is that found family thing where it's, we're in this together. We are going to build community and lift each other up because that's how we get through all this stuff all the time. History repeats, unfortunately, it echoes all of that stuff. And in all of my research, across cultures and time and countries and whatever, the way marginalized identities get through it is with each other and pulling each other up and everything. There's never a hero that comes in and saves us, right? It's always ourselves helping each other out as a one big unit. And so I really just wanted to try and showcase that as much as I could with what is essentially three people. It's Carl, Bertie, and Sophie. And yeah, like to me, that was really just what it was about. That's the chosen family thing, and you will really do what you can for each other.
In your opinion, do you think chosen family can work just as well as a replacement for a blood family, or do you think it's something entirely different, equal, but completely different?
That's actually something I think about a lot. And it's interesting because I do feel 100% that chosen family can operate just like biological family can, in all sorts of ways. Your brothers, your sisters, your siblings, your aunties, your elders, all of that stuff. One thing that is different, though, for better or worse, is biological family, you have that whole back history of when you were a baby and all that stuff. There is that component. But with found family, especially if the biological stuff was, toxic, for lack of a better word. You don't really want that history anyway, right? So you can, with found family, can make a new history. And even that ancestry, blood ancestry, there's this beautiful gift with chosen family, which is you can start again. And you can make new traditions, you can make new holidays, you can gatherings, all of that stuff. And it can be this wonderful, healthy dynamic for everybody. And it's just, when folks have, especially are in nothing but like these toxic backgrounds, and then they find this belonging and this non-toxic way of existing, it's just mind-blowing. And it's just a beautiful gift that you can get from chosen family to finally have that if you never had it before.
Yeah, and I 100% agree. And one other part I always kind of talk about when I meet queer people who have to kind of leave that blood family behind because
Yeah.
it's suddenly gotten to a point where it does not work for them at all. And one thing I will always say about chosen family, and specifically our chosen queer families, are that like there's no obligation there to be there. There's no obligation to be
Yes.
part of this family. And with blood family, that is something that is consistently put forward is like you are expected to participate in this family only because you share blood with them, and they
Hmm.
can be the nastiest, most awful people to you. And in a chosen family, everyone is there because they've decided you are important and this family is important.
Exactly.
And that really shows, especially with like how Carl gets integrated into Sophie and Bertie's family. Their family
Hmm.
unit was just the two of them,
Hmm.
but it then extended to really have Carl be such an integral part of it, and the three of them become such a strong family unit. And I think that that's like there's truly a lot of like glimmers of wonderful, beautiful, hopeful things throughout all of the terror and
Hmm.
deep pain and sadness throughout the book. And those glimmers really do feel so important to our lives now. I did have a question. Like I said, we've talked a lot about Sophie, Bertie, and Carl being the main characters of the
Hmm.
story. When we are introduced to like the 1930s and the El Dorado
Hmm.
for Bertie and his life, we meet Gert and Marcus and Gebhard and Karsten.
Hmm.
Now, we know that the fate of all of them was never truly expanded upon. For you in your writing process, did you write all of their like lives and deaths for yourself to flush out everything, or did you kind of
Mm.
keep their fates even from yourself and just kind of let them exist as questions?
I love this. This is like your first book club. You're doing great.
Thank you.
You should do this more often. Yeah, so I love Gert. I love Gert so much. I just slight spoiler, but not really, because I don't know if it'll ever happen, because I need a plot first. But people have said, will you ever do a sequel? And I said, no, I will never do a sequel, but I really want to do a prequel. And it would just be primarily Gert and maybe some birdie just running around during the Weimar, being themselves and just getting into shenanigans. I want more of that because I just love Gert so much. But
That is, I'm happy that I had questions in my thing about like, is there going to be any other books that's a part of this universe specifically? Of course, a book about Gert is, I think, what was at the top of my mind in
yeah,
that.
there will be no sequel because I think that would really take away from the morals and the finals notes that I was trying to make in the book. But definitely I would love there to be a prequel one day, but I just need to actually figure out the plot. And I've got a few other books ahead of it from other timelines. But anyway, so with Gert and the crew, as it were, their friend group, I purposely never fleshed out what because I wanted to kind of maintain that unknowing for myself while writing it and being in Birdie's head this whole time about what happened to them. And I was worried that if I decided what happened, knew for a fact what happened, it would take away that pain, for lack of a better word. So yeah, no, I purposely withheld from ever deciding officially what happened to them. The short version is for all of the friend group, not good things, we'll put it that way, but that was kind of what I kept it at for myself because I felt that it was important to unfortunately leave readers with a feeling, honestly, of incompleteness. You don't necessarily get closure. You don't necessarily get a final answer or anything. And as much as I wanted to give that to the reader and to myself, I knew it was really important not to do that because that's the vast majority of loved ones who lost loved ones and friends in the Holocaust and World War II. Like there are entire families to this day that don't know what happened to their grandparents, their great grandparents, all this stuff, and they will never know. And so I really wanted to, it's mean of me, but I really wanted to kind of hit that home for the reader where it's like, yeah, it really sucks. And this is something that affects people to this day. So yeah, I just purposely kept that question mark there, even for myself, to maintain that feeling for to honor all the people living or dead that have had no closure and we don't know what happened to these folks.
And I think that you've also tuned into something common in the kind of modern queer world as well with
Yeah.
that. I've lived a lot of lives, and there are people that I had really deep connections with when I lived in Brooklyn, and then time
Hmm.
moved on, and I found out 10 years later that they are now dead, and there's no one knows what happened.
Yeah.
So that's a through line into modern queer life, I think, quite a bit as well, that really resonated with me. Though I'm happy for all of us that we don't really know their fates, and we can hope for
Yeah.
the best and be maybe a little dishonest to ourselves in hoping
Yeah.
that something not as cruel or awful
Yeah.
happened. And I think, I don't know how many other people do this when they're reading things, but you connect different universes all together. And in my head, I was like, you know what? Someone found a box of Marcus's photos, like at some point after the war,
Yeah.
and somebody had them in storage, and it's like a whole like somebody someday they'll be found in a suitcase or something,
Yeah.
and in that universe they get added to the history of like the queer people in this time frame.
Yeah. Yeah. We can go with that.
Well, because we were very lucky. Things like that have happened in the US. Like there was Casa Susana in New York, that all of those photos just appeared one
Yeah.
day. Same with the letters from PS, please burn this, that were literally just pulled out of the garbage one day.
Yeah.
So we can cross our fingers and hope that in this universe, photos Marcus took, something that
Exactly.
these existences did not get completely annihilated.
Yeah, we
Uh,
absolutely. I'm behind this.
I hate to hear that there won't be a sequel. I do love to hear that there will be a prequel because you really, Gert was the main point of devastation for me throughout the book. And I was texting my husband updates while I was reading. And at one point they were just like, I can't take any more of these updates. And when I finally confirmed to them that Gert was dead, they were like, I didn't want to know.
Yeah.
I know, none of us did. You really wrote a like perfect character to fall in love with very little screen time isn't the right word, but I don't know what else to call it.
Page time is what I call
Yeah,
it.
Gert doesn't have a huge amount of page time themselves. We get a lot
Yeah.
of Birdie thinking about it and like thinking about Gert's life and potential end and all of those things. And you really got me in the last chapter. See, Roy, I was mad at you
Oh
for
yeah, I
doing
did that
that.
intentionally. I'm a very mean writer at the end of the day. And the amount of loved ones and friends who would be like, "Oh my God, I'm reading your book right now. I love it," and would send me like these live text updates. And as the book continued, it would just like devolve into angry faces and not emojis. And I was like, "Yeah, I know what parts you're at." And no one wanted to speak to me after that final chapter. And I was like, "Yeah, I feel you."
I felt like you did give us at least a little bit of relief that Roy was still alive and he was there and waiting for them. And that felt like that glimmer again that I was talking about, where like we got that little bit of happiness that keeps us pushing on
Yeah.
through the extremely dark book and then times that we're really living in.
Hmm.
Which, speaking of, like when you began writing this novel, how aware of the like parallels between the world of the book and the current political and social climate
Hmm.
we're going to be?
Yeah, so that was a really surreal experience because again, like this really started for me back in like 2015, 20. It was before the 2016 election. I remember that specifically. And so there was, in my mind, no connection because it was just a different world then. Things weren't amazing, but it was a different world compared to now. And so I'm researching and researching and researching, and I'm also living in America, the United States. And as time's going on, I'm feeling increasingly, those like apocalyptic movies where they've got like the wild looking scientist holding all the papers, being like, why is no one listening to me? The earthquake is coming or whatever. That's what I was feeling like. I was like, this is wild. And, there are a lot of parallels. And I was just kind of watching it happen. And it was spooky in its own way. It was very surreal. And oddly enough, to not get too bogged down in what was happening currently, I would just go back into researching the past, which was an interesting way of distracting me. And yeah, so it was just a really fascinating thing. And I connected just to myself so many parallels that I ended up creating after the book had come out. I realized I had all this info that people might want to know about. I actually created this whole free course that's online now about the similarities and differences. It's on my website if folks want to check that out. It's like 16 hours of content. I'll be honest, it's hardcore. Pretend it's like a podcast. Like you don't have to actually look at the screen. But anyway, there are similarities, but also lots of differences in a way that's very optimistic, for lack of a better word. All I'll say then to kind of wrap up this part is was researching, was writing, da 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 da, watching this stuff happening in the United States, and then I got the actual book deal in January of 2024. And we're like, yay, book deal. Then the 2024 election happens. And I said, oh, so that's the world this book's going to debut into. Awesome. And so some adjustments had to be made for safety and all that stuff. But yeah, so it's been a ride. It's been a ride. Folks have sometimes asked me, like, how'd you write this so fast for it to be part of our current times? And I said, I did not. I did not. And I'll be honest, I tried really hard to keep the present day out of it because I really wanted to tell these people's story. Thanks for putting that in the chat. Any parallels people see were technically not intentional. I know it might be a little hard to believe, but again, this was a 10-year project and I was really dedicated to it being as accurate within itself as possible.
have all heard people repeat for the entirety of our lives that history repeats itself. We, I think, all didn't think it would be so direct and literal. No one could have really seen how the playbook would just be copied exactly because we all are in the world of like, we've seen this happen. We're going to catch this before the playbook gets pulled out again.
Hmm.
But I think that, yeah, it's a very important piece to have come out at this time because I do think it's a perfect segue for people who maybe aren't as familiar with what happens after the Holocaust, like with the Allied
Hmm.
forces. Because even I told you before we had started that I was pretty well versed in a lot of the topics of this book
Yeah.
already. But one of the really interesting things that I did not know prior was that not only were the American like Allied forces keeping the queer people imprisoned, I did not realize that they kept the Nazi punishments for these crimes instead of
Yes.
reverting back to Germany's prior to the Holocaust. And it really goes to show that like the US has never truly been anything but a Christo-fascist like machine that just wants to eradicate queer people as much as possible. And it's
Hmm.
wild to really see that parallel right now. And I hope that people find this book and truly learn that bit of history that you made so glaringly obvious for people to learn.
I really appreciate that. And one thing I like to, quote unquote, I like to add when folks bring up the current times and like somewhat understandably, there's plenty of folks being like, oh my God, this is not who we are as a country. And like, this is horrific. Please don't get me wrong on that. Absolutely, this is awful. But for a lot of marginalized groups, in so many ways, this stuff has been happening this whole time. And it's just that the mainstream folks have now finally seen it and sometimes are affected themselves. In a lot of ways, to me, I'm like, you know what? Better late than never. But it's like for the rest of us, it's Tuesday. You know, this is a horrifying new chapter. And we're like, well, it's already been here. And what I remind folks is that Hitler, a lot of his stuff, his inspiration was actually from the United States and seeing how we treated our marginalized people. For example, the Trail of Tears, Jim Crow, all that stuff. And he thought, hey, those are great ideas, United States. And then he just took them even further. And so it's here because it never left. And in a weird way, I hope that kind of brings comfort to people because it means that marginalized people have been surviving this stuff for forever with significantly less resources than mainstream people. And we are going to get through this. I sincerely believe that. Prop up your marginalized folks because they know what's up and how to get through this because we've done it before. Our ancestors have done it. And so here we are. And the last optimistic thing I'll say is I'm sincerely hoping that now that all of these sins that have been covered up forever have finally bubbled to the surface for everyone, now that everyone's seeing them, we can finally properly address them. At least some of these things. And once this headache is over, we can start moving forward with better things, shall we say.
I it's interesting to see other people realize that the US history that we've been taught for so long is a kind of cover up for the actualities of what has happened in the world, especially at the
Mhm.
hands of the American people and white people kind of in general.
Yes.
And I think that the Lilac People really is very timely and helpful for us to realize that our identities have been scrutinized since the get-go. Even
Yeah.
though, trans and queer people have been around forever, the opposing forces have been here for a long time. They've never gotten rid of us. We still exist. We are still here. No
Yep.
matter how hard they try, we are still here. We're still going. In the book, characters have to kind of repeatedly justify their identity to the authorities, like the transvestite cards, things like
Hmm.
that. In the book, you say they wanted proof of what I already knew, Birdie talking about his identity
Yeah.
as a man. How do you, sorry, I lost my train of thought.
That's okay.
How does constant scrutiny of things like our identities change the way that someone understands themselves?
Ooh, that's a great one. Yeah, that's That's like a whole therapy appointment right there.
You can thank
That
Jonathan for that one.
Thanks, Jonathan. No, I'm kidding. No, it's a great question. No, it's so great because, again, I don't want to speak outside of my lane, but I assume that virtually any marginalized identity has to deal with this and, this scrutiny of who we are and our identities and having to prove ourselves either yes, I'm a man, or yes, I'm a woman, or yes, I'm non-binary, or I'm a person of color and I'm not this thing you think I am, like this awful negative whatever. And so I feel a lot of us are always like trying to be on our best behavior because if one of us even looks wrong for 5 minutes, like suddenly the entire community is being ostracized. Yeah, we all know
Mhm.
this. But
Yep.
yeah, I think it can. I don't think it changes who we are on the inside, the constant scrutiny, but I do think it can cause this, not double life, that's a little too strong, but I feel a lot of us, at least marginalized, who we are inside our homes, if our homes are safe, or with our, for lack of a better term, our own people in a safe environment. When we feel completely secure and safe and seen, we are different than when we are just out in the world. And, maybe I'm speaking too broadly, but I feel that is the case for most marginalized people. And that's why across communities, we have code switching. It
Mhm.
could be the way we walk, the way we talk, the vernacular we use, all of this stuff. And it's almost, I feel, it's almost as if we don't want to look bad, quote unquote, in front of the mainstream people, not even so much for the danger of ourselves, but the danger it could give to our community and our loved ones. And because, yeah, we could talk about this all day, but I don't think it fundamentally changes who we are on the inside, but I do think it changes who we can sometimes perceive or give ourselves to be on the outside. And a little bit like with Carl, Birdie wants to give Carl these masculinity lessons, basically, to be a
Mhm.
very specific type of man. And Carl's like, I am a man, but I'm kind of softer. I'm not this kind of a man. And so it's this, but you need to do this to survive. And
That was one of the things that I connected very deeply with when it came to Carl. I've continuously shifted my gender presentation for the
mhm,
last 15 years, and I have lived 10 years full time as a woman, a lot of time as
yeah,
a man, a lot of time in between. And Carl very specifically struck with me as like the one I really identified with because I'm like, oh, I don't care about people's expectations of this.
yeah,
There's something that I connect with it and I do it in a certain way. And I really like doing that. And to see Carl have to shift and change to do that, even though he doesn't really want to and doesn't think he
mhm,
can, as we watch his progress throughout the story, it is it's very heartwarming. And you have that at the end when he's doing so well and really saves the day with
yeah,
his abilities. You see how sometimes that scrutiny of others can prepare us for the world. But like you said, in our circles, in our homes, in our places, we don't have to always be in that way.
exactly. Yeah, well said.
And I've really enjoyed this. I think our time is wrapping up. So my last question, I know we don't get a follow-up to how Bertie, Sophie, and Carl's lives are in America. But I just have one question that I'd like to know what you kind of think about it is when they get settled, when Bertie and Sophie and Carl get settled into America and land where they're going to land for a while, does Bertie start to make a new album?
Does Birdie start to make a new album? I don't know. Maybe he does. In a lot of ways, it might be like a new album of what? Like, yeah, his chosen family, obviously, but I worry that he might struggle to find like a new trans community. But yeah, let's go with yes. Let's say
Yeah,
so. You know what? Let's say he's the one that finds all of Marcus's photos and
we
he makes a
we
new
love that.
album.
We
There you
love that.
go.
Because, it was one of the things thinking about the timeline, I jumped to like, I would love to see what Bertie and Carl specifically, more Bertie really have to think about like Christine Jorgensen in the 50s when
That's
she blew up as like
fair.
a cultural moment. Like is Birdie sitting at home clipping all the articles about Christine Jorgensen out and putting them into a new album.
That's a
Uh,
good, he probably is actually. Like, I feel like they stay in New York City for a little bit, but they are going to settle in the Midwest. So they are going to lose that queer and trans community that would have been in New York. But yeah, that's a good point. I mean, Christine Jorgensen and all those folks, he would totally still be doing the newspaper clippings.
yeah.
Absolutely.
It's
I
so
just love this book, and
simple.
obviously, from how much I've talked at you about it,
I love this.
I could keep going, but since we're behind, I figured it's perfect time to wrap it up. And I'm happy to know that Bert would still be making some sort of iteration. Bertie would be making some sort of iteration of the book.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Mame
Well,
and Milo, thank y'all so much
Thank
for
you.
this conversation. This was really special, and we got through the difficult tech issues at the beginning.
Listen, queer people always see things through. We're fine. We got this.
exactly.
If anyone has any other questions or comments or things to ask Milo or Mame before we sign off, please join in or put it in the chat. Also, you can follow Mame on Instagram and on YouTube. And please get Milo's book and check out his website and the amazing resources on there as well. And thank y'all so much for coming to Queer Visitors. I'll put this recording up. I will replace the crowdcasts with this recording. So when you go back, at least it will be with the whole collection. And hopefully next time we'll be in a better place tech-wise. But thank y'all so much. This was so magical and cool. And
Thank you so much for having me. It's
Thank you
fun to get
so
back in drag
much.
for something.
I thank you everyone for coming tonight. Thank you, Jonathan. Thanks everyone who supported this, supported the book. And Mame, really wonderful time talking with you. I feel like we could have gone for like 4 hours. Like
Oh yeah, we could have just
we
kept
would have
going.
nerded out on
Uh,
this.
if you ever find your way in very northern New York, I live in a city with a lilac festival, so
There you
we
go.
can sit amongst the lilacs and talk about queer history.
Oh, I love that.
Jonathan, do you know what book is next?
I do not. We are taking kind of queer visitors on the road to the American Book Lovers Association
Ooh,
in Pittsburgh, and I'm going to see what kind of new books are on the horizon for us to
Ooh.
explore, hopefully in the spring if this winter ever ends.
well, that sounds awesome. I'm looking forward to hearing what the next book is once it's decided.
I know I was sad I missed an Oz book. I was like, wait, if I would have realized, I would have jumped in for that one as well.
Not just one Oz book. We read like four or five, the first four of them, I want to
Oh
say.
my gosh, yeah. I would have, if I wasn't covered in dust renovating this house, I would have been so thrilled to join
Welcome to
in
the
on that.
rest of your life
Oh, I know.
forever.
Okay,
Um,
thank you so much,
Thank
everyone,
y'all.
for being
Thank
here.
you, everybody. I hope you have a great rest of your week.